The twins screamed through every storm. That was the fact of my life in those years, the one I could not outrun, the one my council tried to solve with healers and wet nurses, and a parade of gentle-voiced women who lasted, on average, 3 nights before they packed their belongings and asked to be escorted to the southern road. Lyra and Fen, 4 years old, my brother Aldous' children, left to me when the fever took him and his wife in the same cold week 3 winters past. I had brought them into Thornvale Hold and called them my wards and meant every word of it. I would raise them, I would see them safe, I would do for them what their father could not. I had not understood, when I made that promise, that safe and sleeping were 2 entirely different things. The storms rolled in from the eastern ridge every few weeks, sometimes more. The moment the first thunder cracked above the hold, Lyra and Fen were awake and screaming. A high, ragged, twin-pitch sound that carried from the north tower down through the stone corridors and into my own chambers. Every wolf in the courtyard went still when it started. My steward Brennan had once described it, quietly and diplomatically, as a sound that reorders one's priorities. He was not wrong. I had sat with them through 100 storms, 1 child on each knee, talking low, walking the floor, singing badly, in a voice that was suited to commands, and not much else. The healers had tried lavender smoke and warm milk and the particular rocking cradle that cost more than a pack-keeper's annual wage. None of it held. My wolf, whom I called Dusk in the private language between us, had no advice. He would simply sit at the edge of my awareness during a storm, patient and still, as though he were waiting for something. I had learned to stop asking what. It was my housekeeper, Marta, who brought her to me. Marta had run Thornvale's domestic order for 22 years and had earned the right to bring me proposals without appointment. She appeared in my study one morning in late autumn and set a single piece of paper on my desk, a letter, written in a precise and economical hand, from a traveling songkeeper named Willa, who had been wintering with a family in the village of Ashen Crossing, 2 hours' ride to the west. She came to sing at the crossing's harvest rite, Marta said. She stayed after when she saw the family's youngest. The boy was afraid of thunder, apparently. The father wrote to his cousin here in the hold, and the cousin wrote to me. I read the letter. Willa was, by her own description, a keeper of the old repertoire, the traveling tradition of lullabies and story songs that the northern packs had carried for generations, mostly passed down from mothers to daughters, and latterly to anyone who asked to learn. She had no pack affiliation. She charged nothing for her work with children, though she accepted lodging and meals and was grateful for both. She was, she wrote, available to winter somewhere warmer than Ashen Crossing if a hold had need. The boy slept through 2 storms, Marta said, watching me read. The father wrote it plainly, 2 storms that would have had the boy shrieking, and he slept through both. I looked up. Send for her. Marta had already drafted the invitation. I suspected she had drafted it before she came to show me the letter. That was Marta, who had kept this hold running through my brother's death and the twins' arrival and 4 years of my own grinding, sleepless tenure. I signed it. Willa arrived on a gray morning 6 days later in a cart driven by one of Ashen Crossing's pack keepers who turned it around and started back before she had fully climbed down. She was small and had the look of someone accustomed to arriving in unfamiliar places. Her eyes moved across the courtyard with the practiced ease of a woman who had learned to map a new space quickly and calmly. She carried a single canvas pack and a flat leather case that held, I would later learn, a small drum, a bone flute, and several cloth-bound books of handwritten songs. She wore a traveling coat that was good quality and slightly too large for her, belted at the waist. I met her in the entry hall rather than the courtyard. My steward Brennan thought this was beneath my dignity. I disagreed. The woman had come to help me with a problem I had not solved in 3 winters, and she deserved to be met at the door. She gave me a short, composed bow. Alpha, I'm Willa. Thank you for the letter. Thank you for coming, I said, and meant it simply. She was somewhere between 30 and 40, though the northern traveling life made ages hard to judge. She had a quality of stillness about her, not the stillness of someone holding themselves carefully in check, but the genuine stillness of someone who was not in the habit of spending energy unnecessarily. My wolf, who had no opinion about most people, noted her arrival without comment. I could feel his attention shift toward her, the way a hound lifts its head toward a sound it wants to hear more of. Marta took charge of the practical arrangements. A room in the east wing, meals in the household hall, free use of the kitchens, access to the north tower where the twins slept. Willa listened to all of it and said she would need a day to settle in and introduce herself to the children before a storm, if we had that kind of time. We did not. The eastern sky had been wrong all morning, a particular greenish cast to the clouds that the hold's oldest wolves read as a 2-day-out storm. We got 8 hours. By nightfall the thunder was walking the ridge, and by the time the first real crack came down from the east, the north tower was already filling with sound. Lyra first, then Fen, the pitched twin scream that I had learned to hear from every room in the hold. I was already moving down the corridor when I heard something else. A voice. Not raised, not urgent, a voice singing, low and unhurried, as though the storm were not happening. I stopped in the corridor outside the tower door. Dusk, inside me, went very quiet. Not the tense, braced stillness he held during the storms. Something else. The stillness of something finding its alignment. The singing continued. I could not make out the words through the door. It was old language, I thought. The northern pack tongue that had mostly been set aside for common speech 2 generations back, though the songkeepers had kept it. The melody was simple and moved in a pattern of 3, repeating, like waves that returned with small changes each time. And then, I stood in the corridor and listened to this happen. The twins went quiet. Not all at once. Lyra first, then Fen, the screaming loosening and then giving way, over the course of perhaps 2 minutes, to something that was not yet silence but was heading toward it. By the time another thundercrack came, the screaming had dropped to crying, and the crying was decreasing even as I stood there, not breathing, my hand still on the door I had not opened. Then silence. Then the storm, and nothing else. I stood in the corridor for a long time. Dusk was warm in my chest, in a way that had nothing to do with the twins, and everything to do with the woman in the tower room, and I filed that information away for later, and went back to my study, and worked until morning. Willa ate breakfast in the household hall with Brennan and 2 of the senior pack keepers. I heard the report afterward. She had been pleasant, and asked good questions about the hold's seasonal patterns, the twins' feeding schedule, whether either of them had shown any early signs of a wolf sense coming in. She was, by all accounts, easy company. Brennan, who was not given to enthusiasm, described her as sensible and specific, which was high praise in Brennan's register. I called on the twins before the morning meal. They were, for the first time in my memory, not immediately demanding and fearful the morning after a storm. Fen was sitting in the window seat watching the rain clear, and Lyra was attempting to fold a piece of cloth into something that she was calling a bird. Both of them looked at me with their mother's eyes, my brother's children, with my brother's dark hair, and their mother Taya's amber eyes, and I felt the usual complicated warmth I always felt when I looked at them, the grief for what they had lost, and the determination to give them whatever I could in its place. The singing lady came, Lyra said, without looking up from her cloth bird. She did. She's going to come again tonight, Fen said, still watching the rain. He said it as a fact, not a question. I found that I was nodding. She is. Dusk, inside me, agreed. I found myself crossing paths with Willa at unexpected times across the first week. She was the kind of person who moved through a hold without creating friction. She knew when a kitchen was busy and came back later. She learned the names of the pack keepers and used them. She sat quietly in rooms that had other people in them, without demanding the room's attention. I watched this from a distance at first. It was not that I was watching her deliberately, it was that she kept turning out to be in the same spaces I entered, and I kept finding reasons not to immediately leave. She was in the outer yard on the 3rd morning, doing something with a long piece of cord and a bundle of dried herbs that turned out to be a method of making a weighted toy for children who had too much energy and not enough to throw it at. She had, apparently, asked one of the kitchen women whether the twins had any particular enthusiasms, and the kitchen woman had said that Fen liked throwing things, and Willa had made him a throwing toy by the following morning. I stopped to ask about it. She explained the construction in 3 sentences. I asked a question. She answered it. I asked another question. The courtyard light shifted, and I realized we had been talking for 20 minutes about, essentially, the physics of weighted cord toys and the particular engineering considerations of North Tower chambers with low ceilings. You've never done this for a hold before, I said, not an accusation, genuine curiosity. Not formally. She was rewinding the spare cord around her hand, efficient and unhurried. I've helped families in villages, a few pack settlements. A hold is larger. Is that a problem? She considered. No. Children are the same size in a hold. I smiled before I knew I was going to. Dusk lifted his head in my chest, like a man turning toward a sound. She came to the twins every evening before sleep, storm or not. Within 3 days of her arrival, Lyra had begun requesting specific songs by humming small fragments of melodies at Willa until Willa recognized them and supplied the words. Fenn's approach was more systematic. He had obtained from somewhere a piece of chalk and was maintaining, on the slate beside his bed, a list of songs he had authorized for ongoing use. Willa had told him this was a fine idea and had asked to contribute to the list, and Fenn had, after serious consideration, permitted this. I came to the tower door every night that first week and stood in the corridor and listened. I told myself this was oversight. I was responsible for these children. I should know what was happening in their chambers. This was not entirely false. It was also not the whole truth. The truth was that I had not heard singing in Thornvale Hold in 3 years. My brother had sung. Badly, cheerfully, with great confidence and no technique, and after he died the hold had gone quiet in a specific way. I had not noticed how quiet it had gone until Willa's voice came through the tower door, and something in the stone walls of the place seemed to breathe differently. I asked Brennan, on the 4th day, what he made of her. Brennan thought for a moment. She doesn't ask for anything, he said. Most people who come to holds ask for things, even small things. Better placement at table, more favorable chamber, attention from the alpha. She asks about the children. She asked me whether there were any traditional pack songs the twins' parents had known, whether I remembered any being sung at their naming ceremony. I didn't, but she asked. I sat with that. What did you tell her? That their father used to sing in the old language, badly, and that their mother used to laugh at him for it. She said she thought that was very good for children to grow up with. Brennan paused. She asked if you sang. What did you say? I said you had tried, and that the twins' opinion of the results had been expressed non-verbally. I thought about the months I had spent walking that tower room with one screaming child on each shoulder, attempting, in the voice that I used to address a full hall of 300 wolves, to produce something resembling a lullaby. That's accurate. She didn't laugh, Brennan said. She said it was the trying that counted. The next storm came on the 6th night. I heard it building through the afternoon. That particular taste in the air that the wolves caught before any other sign. A sharpening of the cold that meant the eastern ridge was drawing weather down. By evening, the clouds were dark and moving fast. At the hold's evening meal, I found myself watching Willa across the hall. She was sitting with Marta and 2 of the younger pack mothers, eating steadily, speaking occasionally, listening more than she spoke. She had the twins' chalk and slate list folded in her coat pocket. I had seen her check it before she came downstairs. She looked up once and found me looking at her, and did not look away quickly, the way most people did. She held it for a moment, a direct and uncomplicated look, and then returned to her meal. Dusk, inside me, said nothing. He was warmer than he had been in 3 years. I went to the tower an hour early that night, not to listen from outside the door. I told myself I wanted to be present when the storm started, that the children might take reassurance from their guardian's presence alongside the song. This was reasonable. I knocked before entering. Lyra and Fenn were already in their beds. Willa was sitting on the low stool between the 2 cots, the bone flute in her hands, running through something low and breathy that was not the storm song. She looked up when I entered. The twins looked up. Papa King is here, Fenn said. This was what he called me, a formulation he had arrived at independently at age 3, and no one had corrected because it was not wrong in any way that mattered. He can stay, Lyra said, with the certainty of a 4-year-old granting royal dispensation. I brought a chair from the corner and set it near the wall, not crowding the space Willa had made between the 2 cots. She returned to the breathy melody on the flute, working something out quietly, as though I had been there all along. I liked that. I was accustomed to rooms that changed when I entered them, conversations that stopped, postures that straightened, ease that evaporated. This room did not change. The storm came over the ridge and hit the hold while Fenn was still awake. I saw the moment the first real thunder struck. His whole body went rigid, the way it always did, the fear moving through him before he could hold it back. He was 4. He was a wolf child who had lost his parents to illness and was left with an uncle who loved him, and was terrible at lullabies, and a stone hold that was very large and very cold in the winter. Willa set down the flute and began to sing. Not the full storm song yet, just the opening phrase, low and repeated, a call rather than a full melody. I watched Fenn's body hear it. The rigidity shifted, not gone, but loosened. Lyra, who had been watching her brother with the sympathetic anxiety she always showed when he was afraid, turned toward Willa's voice instead. Then the full song. I had heard it through the door on the first night, and thought I understood it. I was wrong. Hearing it in the same room, without the stone between us, was entirely different. The song was old, truly old, the kind of old that is not about the words but about the shape the words make, the pattern of breath and silence that the northern packs had learned to use when the world outside was too loud. It was not a lullaby in the way that word usually meant. It was more like a container, something that the chaos could not enter because it was already full. Dusk, in my chest, was still, not the grief stillness or the waiting stillness. Still the way a held thing goes still when it finds its rest. Fenn slept first. The fear moved through him and the song held him and he slipped under, in the space of perhaps 10 minutes, with his fist curled under his chin the way he had slept since he was an infant. Lyra watched her brother sleep and then lay back against her pillow and closed her eyes. Willa's voice did not change. It continued at the same quiet and unhurried pace until both of them were fully down. Then she let the song taper and go to silence, not abruptly but the way a good fire goes to coals, with warmth persisting after the flame. She set her hands in her lap. The storm was still going outside. I had forgotten it was happening. You didn't need to stay, she said, quietly, not a criticism. I know. I was quiet for a moment. My brother used to sing to them. He was, as Brennan has told you, poor at it, but they never screamed through a storm when he was there. She considered this. The twins were breathing in the even, deep rhythm of good sleep. The song isn't really about the music, she said. What is it about? She looked at the children for a moment. Someone staying. The hold was quiet around us. I heard the storm working itself out against the walls, and the far distant call of one of the court wolves in the east tower, and nothing else. It had been quiet like this in my brother's time, in the hall late at night when the rest of the hold was asleep, and Aldous and I had talked the way men only talk when no one else is present, about what they feared, what they wanted, what they thought they were supposed to be. I had not talked like that with anyone in 3 years. I stayed in the chair until she stood. I'll leave you to check on them, she said. You should know, I said, before she reached the door, that you can stay the winter. The whole winter, if you're willing. Not only for the storms. She paused. I held the honesty of what I had just said, which was more honest than I had intended, and waited. I'll think on it, she said. She did not say it dismissively. She said it the way she did everything, specifically, with the full weight of meaning it. Over the weeks that followed, the hold changed in small ways. Willa had a method of being in a place that was not the method of a guest. She began to know where things were kept, where the light was best in the morning, which of the pack keepers preferred company, and which preferred to be left to their work. She began teaching Lyra 2 songs for the bone flute, the child's small fingers finding the holes with more patience than I would have credited her. Fenn began to be interested in the drums, the small frame drum that lived in Willa's leather case, and Willa had, apparently, an unlimited reserve of patience for a 4-year-old who wanted to hit things rhythmically. I found reasons to be near the North Tower more than my schedule required. It was Brennan who finally said it. He appeared in my study one afternoon, laid a report on my desk, and then stood there in the particular way he stood when he had something to say that was not in the report. If you're going to spend your evenings outside the tower door, he said, you might consider spending them inside it. I've been inside it. Twice. He was looking at the window. The songkeeper doesn't push herself forward, Alpha. I've observed that about her. She waits to be asked. He picked up an entirely different document from the corner of the desk and began reading it, which was Brennan's way of indicating that the conversation was over. I went to her room that evening and knocked. She was at the small writing table near the window, working on something in one of her cloth-bound books. She opened the door and looked at me with that direct and uncomplicated look that I had stopped trying to read anything into and had simply begun to find accurate. I wondered, I said, if you might take a walk through the hold. I could tell you its history. She looked at me for a moment. Does the hold have an interesting history? Parts of it. The east wing is dull. The foundations are older than the hold itself, which is worth explaining. A pause, then the corner of her mouth moved. All right. We walked for 2 hours. I told her about the original fortification, pre-pack, likely a traveler's station before the wolfkin settled this ridge, and the way the hold had been expanded in 3 stages across 4 centuries. She asked questions that were not the usual questions. Not how many wolves do you command, or how large is the territory. She asked what the East Wing had been before it was storage. She asked whether the pack had any particular traditions around the founding season. She asked, standing in front of the old archive room, whether anyone had catalogued the collection. Not in my time, I said. My mother knew what was in there. She died before she had a chance to teach me. Willa looked at the door for a moment. Would you like to know what's in there? I've always meant to look. We could look, she said, simply. And so we spent the last hour of that walk with the archive room's door open, dust rising in the lamplight, the 2 of us pulling cloth-wrapped bundles from shelves and discovering that my great-grandfather had been, improbably, a dedicated recorder of weather patterns, and that several of the large flat cases contained nothing but 40 years of cloud charts. Willa found this genuinely interesting. I found her finding it interesting. Dusk in my chest was warm in the way that good fires are warm. Not burning, just steady. The storms still came, but they were no longer the event they had been. Lyra now had opinions about which song was appropriate for which storm, based on a classification system that she and Willa had apparently developed, and that bore no resemblance to anything meteorological but which Lyra applied with great seriousness. Fenn's relationship with the storms was changing too. He was no longer afraid, exactly, but the fear was finding a container before it became a scream. He had begun, before particularly large storms, to go to Willa and ask her to start early. She always did. One evening in midwinter, I arrived at the tower door and heard 3 voices instead of 1, Willa's, and then 2 small voices attempting the opening phrase of the storm song, badly, with great enthusiasm. I stood in the corridor and listened to the twins learn to sing their own comfort, Willa patient and specific, correcting the breath and not the will. I did not go in. I stood there in the corridor with my hand on the cold stone of the wall and felt something I had not had a word for in a long time. I found it that night, in my study, alone. The word was home. The hold had been my responsibility for 3 years and a stone residence for longer than that. And standing in that corridor listening to those 3 voices, it had been home. Dusk did not say anything. He put his great head down and rested. The last storm of the midwinter season was the worst. The eastern ridge produced 3 days of buildup and then unleashed everything at once. The kind of storm that made the hold's oldest wolves go quiet and respectful. The kind that sounded, even through 2 feet of stone, like the world coming apart above you. I was in my study when it broke. I heard, from 3 corridors away, the moment the twins did not scream. I put down the report I was reading. I sat with that silence. It was the loudest thing I had heard in 3 years. When the storm had moved on and I went to the tower, Willa was sitting in the chair by the wall, my chair, the one I had brought in on the night I stayed, and both twins were asleep. She looked up when I came in. She did not look surprised to see me. I sat on the low stool between the cots, which was too small for me, and which I did not mention. They did it themselves tonight, I said. Mostly. She was quiet for a moment. Lyra led. She was very certain about which song. I looked at my brother's children sleeping. Fenn had both fists curled under his chin. Lyra had her arm extended toward her brother's cot, the way she had slept since the fever month, one hand reaching. You're teaching them to not need you, I said. Eventually. Yes. You don't have to do that. No. She was quiet. But I want them to be able to weather what comes, without a songkeeper being necessary. The storms will go on long after. She stopped. Long after you leave, I said. She didn't answer immediately. I had not intended to put weight on the words, but they had settled in the room with their full weight anyway. I haven't decided, she said, whether to leave. I looked at her across the small space of the tower room, my brother's children sleeping between us, the storm gone, and the cold clear air beginning to come through the high window. I thought about the corridor on the first night, standing outside the door with my hand raised to knock, not knocking, listening. I thought about the archive room and 40 years of my great-grandfather's cloud charts, and the way she had been interested in them. Genuinely, specifically, with the same quality of attention she gave to the twins, and to the pack keepers, and to the question of which songs belonged to which storms. I thought about Brennan saying she waits to be asked. "I want you to stay," I said. It was the simplest thing I had said in a very long time. She looked at me for a moment in the tower's lamplight. The twins breathed. Outside, the aftermath of the storm was clearing, and I could hear, faintly, the first of the hold's wolves beginning to move in the courtyard below. "All right," she said. Not performed, not hesitant. The way she said everything, specifically, with the full weight of meaning it. I did not reach for her hand that night. That would come later, slowly, in the way of things that are built on knowing rather than heat. A morning in the archive when she showed me a songkeeper's notation system from 200 years back and I stayed to learn it. An evening when she fell asleep in the chair in my study and I put a blanket over her and did not wake her. A walk along the hold's eastern wall in the first snow of the late season, when she said something that made me laugh genuinely, and I could not afterward remember what it was, only that the sound of my own laughter had surprised me. There was the evening she taught me the opening phrase of the storm song, sitting at the kitchen table after the twins were in bed, her voice and then mine attempting the same 3 notes. I was, as Brennan had recorded, poor at it. She did not try to tell me otherwise. She said try again, and I did, and it was not good, and she said try again with more patience than anyone had applied to one of my failures in a long time. And on the 4th attempt, something in my chest opened up and the phrase came out approximately right, and she looked at me with her direct and honest eyes and said, "Yes, that's it." And that was the moment, if I had to name one, not the storm that first night, not the walk through the hold, not any of the slow evenings in the tower room. It was that note, in my voice, in the kitchen, with her saying yes. Something in me that had been waiting for 3 years without knowing it was waiting simply, stopped waiting. I offered her my mark in early spring. Not in ceremony, not before the pack, not on a ceremony floor. We were in the archive room, which had become, over the winter, our particular room, the place we went when the hold was loud and we wanted quiet. I had been reading my great-grandfather's weather journals, and she had been adding to the notation in one of her songbooks, and I had known for some weeks that I was going to ask, and had been waiting for a moment that was the right size. I said her name. She looked up. I told her, plainly, without ceremony and without performance, that I had not come to this knowing her gradually, and then found the bond. The bond had found me early, and I had been finding her gradually, which was, I thought, a better order of things. I told her that the hold was different because she was in it. I told her that what I felt was not a debt for the twins and was not gratitude for the storms, and that I wanted her to understand the difference clearly before she answered. She listened to all of it the way she listened to everything, with her full attention, specifically. When I was finished, she said, "I know the difference." And then she said yes. Lyra, when told, requested that the official joining ceremony include at minimum 2 songs that she had personally approved. Fenn's chalk and slate list was expanded to include the ceremony repertoire. Willa agreed to both of these conditions without negotiation. I thought that she had perhaps had some advance warning. The pack came to the joining in mid-spring, when the hold's great hall was warm enough to leave the high windows open, and the sound could go out into the courtyard where the wolves were gathering. It was not the hold's largest ceremony. I had seen my brothers joining, which had been a 3-day event with guests from 7 packs. This was smaller, intentional. The people of Thornvale, and the wolves of the Ridge, and the old songkeeper traditions that Willa's teacher had taught her, and that she had been carrying, and would now have a place to put down. When she sang the joining song, with Lyra standing solemnly at her side and Fenn playing the small drum with great seriousness, the hall went quiet in the way it had gone quiet the first time I heard her through a tower door, the deep, specific quiet of something being held. The pack was still. I stood at the center of my own joining ceremony and listened to my Luna sing and felt dusk, in my chest, do something I had not known he was still capable of. He wagged. That night, after the hall had quieted and the twins were finally and triumphantly asleep, both of them, in the same moment, which Lyra later described as her greatest achievement, I sat with Willa in the archive room, among my great-grandfather's cloud charts, and the candle burned low, and I thought about what Brennan had said in my study, months ago, about the nature of someone staying. It is not a complicated thing, what she gave the twins. They needed someone who stayed when it was loud, and they got that. But I have thought since, in the quiet of the years that followed, that I needed the same thing. Someone to stay in the loud parts, not to silence the storm, but to hold a shape that the storm could not enter, because it was already full. Lyra has her mother's eyes and my brother's stubbornness, and a voice that will, her teacher tells me, be something extraordinary in a few more years. Fen has expanded the chalk and slate list to 3 slates and is considering a 4th. And Thornvale Hold, which was cold and too quiet for 3 winters, is neither of those things anymore. Willa taught me the storm song properly, in the end, all of it, not just the opening phrase. I am still, by her honest assessment, an instrument better suited to commands than comfort. But the twins have stopped being polite about it and started requesting it, which she says is the highest form of musical approval a 4-year-old can grant. I think she is right. I have found that she usually is.